All right, good morning. Thanks for joining this briefing. We're here today to talk about the global wind turbine market. And frankly, what we've seen in just the last year is nothing short of a seismic shift. The entire competitive landscape has been completely redrawn. So, to kick things off, I want to show you one single number that really tells the whole story. 59%. Let that sink in for a moment. That is the global market share that Chinese wind turbine OEMs captured in 2024. And get this, just last year that number was 43%. So we're not talking about a future trend or some long-term forecast. This is the new reality on the ground, right now. It's a fundamental reshaping of the entire industry.
Okay, so that brings us to our first section. We're calling this the new global leader, because we really need to understand this reshaped market. What does this consolidation around Chinese manufacturing actually look like? Well, to really get a handle on the scale of this change, you just have to look at who the top players are today.
So to put that 59% figure into some real perspective for you, just think about this. 4 of the top 5 biggest wind turbine manufacturers on the planet are now Chinese companies. We're not just talking about 1 or 2 breakout success stories here. This is a systemic shift, one that's built on a really deep industrial capacity. The whole playing field has been completely redrawn. That naturally leads to the next question, right? How did this happen? What's actually driving this dominance? In this next section, we'll dig into the anatomy of that dominance by looking at a data-driven comparison of the key players. Okay, let's take a look at the data. What you're seeing here is a scorecard, essentially comparing China, the US, and the EU across the critical dimensions of the wind industry. And, what's striking is that while policy support is pretty strong across the board, look at China's scores. Perfect 10s in manufacturing and supply chain strength. A 10 in cumulative capacity. This is the bedrock. This is the industrial foundation that's powering its market dominance. It's a huge competitive advantage.
But here's where the story gets really interesting and, frankly, a lot more complicated. Gaining market share is one thing, but it doesn't automatically mean you're financially healthy. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. The entire industry, and I mean everyone, both the dominant Chinese firms and their Western counterparts, is facing a massive, shared challenge, a global profitability crisis.
Yeah, this quote from a recent industry analysis just hits the nail on the head. Profitability crisis threatens supply chain resilience across all manufacturers. It's the perfect summary of the situation. You've got intense price pressures, fierce competition, and rising costs for materials, and it's all squeezing margins to the breaking point. This isn't a problem for just one region. It's a shared struggle for the entire global supply chain. And you can see that financial pressure in black and white right here in the expense data. Look at the R&D expense ratio. To protect their razor-thin margins, companies are slashing their research and development spending. It's been cut almost in half since just 2022. But at the exact same time, look at the sales expense ratio. It's ticking up. They're having to spend more just to compete for deals. It's the classic squeeze, right? You're forced to sacrifice investment in the future just to survive today. So, as if that profitability crisis wasn't enough, there's another layer of complexity we have to talk about. And that's the growing geopolitical headwinds. These aren't just isolated issues in 1 or 2 markets. We're talking about shared risks in a world that feels more fragmented every day. What's really fascinating about this is when you look at what's keeping executives up at night. On the left, you've got the top concerns for Western OEMs. On the right, for Chinese OEMs. And they're practically mirror images of each other. Both sides are deeply concerned about trade barriers, supply chain disruptions, and the rising cost of raw materials. This isn't a us versus them problem. It's a shared global anxiety.
Okay, so let's recap where we are. We have clear market dominance by one region, but a profitability crisis and shared geopolitical risks affecting everyone. So given that complex picture, what's the path forward? That's what we'll cover in our final section, the strategic outlook. Now, despite all these challenges we've talked about, it's not all doom and gloom. There are still some very powerful drivers for growth. And maybe the most important one is policy stability. Things like China's 14th five-year plan or the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. They provide the kind of long-term certainty that companies need to make big investments. And it's those investments that are fueling the next wave of technological innovation. We're talking bigger and bigger turbines pushing past the 10-megawatt mark. And of course, that's what's going to unlock the next massive frontier for the industry, offshore wind. So what's the key takeaway from all of this for you? It's this. Winning in the wind industry from here on out isn't just going to be about who can build the most, the fastest. It's not just about scale.
Success is going to depend on three things: continuous innovation, having stable policies to operate under, and, this is probably the most critical part, being able to strategically navigate what is becoming an incredibly complex and fragmented global supply chain.
Which leaves us with the big, strategic question that's going to define the next decade for this entire sector, an industry that is absolutely critical to the energy transition. Will all this intense global competition actually accelerate the pace of innovation we so desperately need? Or will the rising tide of trade barriers and geopolitical friction end up slowing our collective progress to a crawl? That's the key uncertainty we're all facing. Thank you for your time.